In this section, we're going to get down to work and we're going to begin to create our first application based on .NET MAUI. It is the application that you can see on the screen. This is an application that will allow you to select a color from the combination of 3 slider controls. We can vary each one of the values of the sliders and we can see how the background changes color according to the combination of the 3 colors. Similarly, at the bottom, we have a label control that tells us what is the color obtained in hexadecimal value. We even have a button that allows us to generate a color randomly, and in case we like any of the generated colors, we can click on this button that appears next to the hexadecimal value and a message will appear indicating that the color has been copied. We can test if it has been copied correctly. And here we have the hexadecimal value that we can use in some other application. This is the application that we're going to proceed to create as part of this section. Once we have seen which application we're going to create, let's proceed to create a new project with the .NET MAUI template. Let's specify a name for this project, such as Color Maker. I'm going to click on the Create button to create the project. And once the project has been created, we're going to perform some basic actions to start creating our code for the application. First of all, we're going to indicate that in the app.xaml.cs file, we don't want to start with the shell page, but with the page called main page. Once we have made this change, we're going to go to mainpage.xaml and we're going to proceed to remove all the content that is part of this content page, since we don't need it. We're going to start defining some colors that are going to be part of the application. And it is that previously we have seen how we can assign some properties to the different controls. For example, as part of the properties of a button, we could indicate that we want a background color equal to aqua. The problem of doing this is that if we need to use the same color later, we would have to remember what is this color to apply it in all the places where we want to use it. And even worse, if we were to use an hexadecimal value to define the color. What can we do to simplify this? Well, we can define a section called Resources that is part of a content page. The content page is not the only one that contains this resources section, and we will see this as we go through the lessons. So, as part of the content page, we can define this content page.resources tag, and inside we can define a special tag that will allow us to define a color. This tag is called color. I'm going to assign it a color that I've previously defined. It is this one that we see here. We have here a problem in Visual Studio that tells us that we need to define a key for this color element that we have defined. What does this refer to? Well, we're going to use the following syntax to create an identifier key for this color, and we're going to give it a specific name, for example, primary, to indicate that it is going to be the main color of the application. We're going to proceed to copy and paste a couple of times more this label, and we're going to change the key to each one of them, otherwise we will have problems. We're going to name the last label as tertiary, and we're going to proceed to define a set of colors. In this way, we have already defined a set of colors that will be part of the content page and that we will be able to reuse. For example, if we wanted to define a button establishing its background color, we would have to use this syntax, a pair of braces, and inside the word static resource, to finally place the name of the identifier of one of the colors. For example, let's suppose that we would like to use the secondary color. In this way, we would already be applying a background color for this button using one of the colors that we have defined as part of the resource section. It is very important that you take this into account so that you don't have to remember the colors of the application. Later, we're going to talk more in depth about the resources topic, but for the moment, we're going to work with the colors in this way. Previously, we have seen what is the application we're going to create. So, let's start by determining what is the type of layout we need for the page. What do you think should be the type of layout we should use for the content page? Because we're going to have a single page and we don't need content that is below the visual part of this page, I will use a grid layout. which will allow me to set certain properties as the main container. So, what I'm going to proceed to do is to define as part of the page a grid element. I am going to indicate that I want to set a name for this grid, since we're going to use this name later on. Let's set the name to be, for example, container, and let's specify a background color that is equal to black. Earlier, I indicated that we were going to work with different colors that we have set in the resources section. However, as this is a color that we're going to use only once for the background color of the main grid, we're going to declare it this way. Here we have some problems, and it is that we have forgotten to remove the code behind that belongs to the initial application. I am going to proceed to remove this content so that we do not have problems. This content is hosted in the main page.saml.cs page. Let's start the application once again. And once the application has been deployed, we can already see the layout, which has a black background color. Inside this grid, we're going to be able to nest different controls. We could have also used an absolute layout, since only what we want is to be able to overlap elements, and as much a grid as a layout type, absolute layout allows us precisely to overlay different elements. For me, it is easier to use a grid for this project, so it is a layout that I choose for the application. Once we have established the layout we are going to use for the application, we must create the main section where the different controls are going to be placed. This we're going to do it using an element type frame. Then let's indicate that we want to use a frame. We're going to specify a margin to establish a distance between the right and the left part with respect to the frame control. I'm going to complete some properties. Let's specify the value center for the vertical options, since we want the frame to be centered, and we're going to close this tag to see how it looks in the application. If we return to the emulator, we can see that we already have here the frame centered exactly. And inside the frame is where we're going to place the different controls. I'm going to explain quickly what this property called margin refers to. This property refers to the distance of the control itself in relation to the element that is containing it. In this case, we are indicating that we want to leave a distance of 10 units both left and right. And these values that we see marked here are indicating what is the value of the left margin, what is the value of the top margin, what is the value of the margin to the right, and what is the value of the margin for the bottom of the control. Once we have explained this, we will proceed to define the different controls that will be placed inside the frame. If you remember the application we saw, it accommodated the different elements vertically from top to bottom, and they all looked stacked, one below the other. Therefore, we can use a layout that we have already seen called vertical stack layout, which is optimized to display elements stacked vertically. We can indicate that we want a spacing between each of the elements of 15 units, and we will also indicate that we want the vertical options equal to center. As first visual element, let's indicate that we need a label control. Let's specify, for example, that we want the text to be in bold and that the font size property is equal to large, since we will use this label control to display the name of the application. We will also indicate that we want to center the text. And finally, let's indicate that the text is going to be the name of the application, which is Color Maker. We close this label, we save the changes, and here we can see already this label that is being shown inside the frame element. The next step is to create the different sliders that will allow us to select a value for each of the colors. Let's go back to the XAML file and define a slider control. Let's give it a name. We're going to indicate that the name is SLD red. Let's define the colors for each of the elements of the slider. That is to say, let's define thumb color, and let's use the colors that we have defined previously. Let's write then a static resource, and let's use the primary color. Let's indicate that we want a value for maximum track color equal to the tertiary color. And finally, for minimum track color, let's use the secondary color. Let's close this tag, and we already have the first slider with the colors applied that we have specified. The only problem is that the user cannot know what each slider refers to, so we will create a label control before the slider element to explain to the user what color will be selected, in this case the red value. Let's close this label, save the changes, and here we can see the label that is telling us that we're going to modify the red color for the color generation. I am going to proceed to copy this pair of labels so that we don't have to type everything again, and let's proceed to change the text to green. Let's also change the X name to SLD green and leave the same colors for the properties. Let's do this one more time to specify that we are also going to use a blue color. Let's change the name once more to SLD blue. And we already have the controls that will allow us to carry out the combination of red, green and blue colors. The next step is to define the section where the generated hexadecimal value will appear and the button that will allow us to copy what that value is. We're going to place ourselves inside the vertical stack layout, and after this slider element, we're going to proceed to indicate that we want a control frame. We're going to place a corner radius equal to 25 so that it has a rounding in the corners. Let's set the horizontal options equal to center. And as we are going to locate the element that is going to show us the hexadecimal value next to an image button, we will use a horizontal stack layout, and inside let's place a label control, to which we will assign a name equal to LVLX. Let's also indicate that we want to place the text at the end of the label, and we will specify a text equal to X value. And we will place an initial color equal to black in hexadecimal format. Finally, let's set the vertical options equal to center, and let's see how this looks in the emulator. We can already see here the frame element with the specified label, and let's proceed to add the button that will allow us to copy the hexadecimal value. Then, after the label element, we're going to indicate that we want an image button. We will indicate some additional properties, such as a margin to position this button a little away from the label. We will indicate that the other values will be equal to 0. We will also specify a height request to specify a height of this button equal to 25. The image that we're going to use is called copy.svj, which we will set in the source property, and also set the vertical options value equal to center. Finally, the width request value will be equal to 25. And we can already see the space where the image button should be, only as we have not added the image to the project, we cannot see it. I am going to drag the image that you are going to be able to find as part of the resources of the course, and I am going to place it in the resources folder and in this specific folder called images. Once I've copied the image into the project, let's restart the application. And here we can see that we already have the image button with the specified image. Finally, we're going to proceed to create the button that will allow us to generate a random color. For it, we're going to position ourselves after the frame element, but before the closing tag of the vertical stack layout. Let's create a new button. Let's specify a name equal to BTN random. Let's also specify a background color equal to the primary color and a text equal to generate random color. Let's close the label. And with this, we have defined the main graphical interface of the application. The next step is to proceed to code the functionality. In this video, we're going to focus on changing the background color from the values that we select as part of the sliders. The first step that we must carry out is to know when a value of one of the sliders has changed, and for it we're going to return to the XAML file. Let's look for the slider controls, since we want to set the value change event, which will let us know when one of the values of the sliders changed. Let's create an event handler, and because we're going to reuse the event handler for each of the sliders, let's rename the event to a more generic name, such as slider value changed. I'm going to copy the name we've specified. Let's go to the main page.xaml CS file and proceed to also rename the event handler that is part of this file, so that it is related to the XAML file. Next, we're going to proceed to call the event handler, and the first thing we're going to do is to get the values of each of the sliders. Then, we're going to indicate that we want to define a variable called red, which is going to be equal to SLD_red, which is the name of the control. And we're going to access a property called value, which is going to give us precisely the value of each one of the sliders. Let's do the same for the other sliders. And once we have the three variables that correspond to the three colors, let's proceed to define a color data type in a variable called color. As part of the framework, we have a class called color that contains a method called fromRGB, which allows us to pass a red color, a green color, and a blue color to generate a color from the combination. Let's use this method and pass the variables red, green, and blue as part of the values of the method. Subsequently, let's create a method called setColor to set the color corresponding to the controls in the application. Let's define the method and indicate that we want to set this color to the button called btnRandom. We specify its background color equal to color, which contains the value of the generated color. We also want to modify the color of the main container, which we name container, so we set its background color equal to color. We also want to display the hexadecimal color in the LVLX tag in its text property. But we cannot directly assign the color value since they are incompatible types. What we can do is to use a method called toX, which will return the hexadecimal value of a color in a string format. Let's test these changes that we have applied. Let's change the color of this slider, and we see how effectively it is changing both the color of the background and the color of this button. We have not yet set the event for the green and blue sliders, so the next step is to return to the SAML file. Let's proceed to copy this property with the slider value change value, and we'll proceed to paste this code inside the second and third slider. Let's proceed to test the application one more time. Let's test the first slider, the second slider, and we can already see how the background color is changing according to the selected value of the sliders. In this video, we're going to focus on the generation of a random color. The first thing we're going to do is to generate the clicked event for this button. Then, let's indicate that we want to generate an event handler for the clicked event. We're going to go to the code behind, and as part of this event handler, I am going to define a variable called random that is equal to a new instance of the random class that is going to allow us to generate random values. I'm going to define a variable called color, and I'm going to use once again the class called color.fromRGB to be able to generate a random color with a random values. Let's pass as the first value random.next, and the lowest value will be the value 0, and the highest number will be 256, because as you can see in the description part, it tells us that this value is going to be excluded from the generation of values. I am going to copy this line 2 more times, and this way we will be able to generate a color from random values within a range of 0, and it must be 256. Once we have the new color, we can invoke again the method called setColor, passing the color that has been randomly generated. Let's test how the application looks like. I'm going to proceed to press this button and notice how successfully we are already generating a random color. Here, what we have to do is to also set the value of each of the sliders, since currently we only generate the color. How can we do this? Well, I'm going to proceed to stop the project one more time, and after invoking the setColor method, I'm going to proceed to indicate SLDRed.value is equal to color dot, and I'm going to get only the red color. I'm going to do the same for each of the sliders. The advantage of this code is that directly we're going to obtain a value compatible with the values of the slider, since the slider accepts values from 0 to 1, and it is precisely the value that we're going to provide each of these fields. Let's proceed to test the application to see how the change we have applied works. Let's press the button and see how the values of each of the sliders are already being modified. It would appear that this is working correctly. However, I'm going to do something for you to see if it's working right or not. I'm going to go to the method called setColor, and I'm going to indicate that I want to use the book dot, we have to import the namespace system.diagnostics, and I'm going to use the writeLine method, passing as a parameter the value color.toString, so you can see how many times the setColor method is executed. Let's start the application once again. I'm going to press the button. I'm going to go to the output window. And as part of the output, you can see that the method has been executed multiple times, even though we pressed the button only once. What is happening with the code is that once we set one of these values, it automatically invokes the event that carries out the execution of the setColor method. We must find a way to avoid invoking this method in case we don't need it. For this, I will proceed to create a new field as part of the application. I'm going to indicate that it is of Boolean type. We're going to call it isRandom. We're going to go back to the event, and we're going to set the isRandom property to be set to true when we start the execution of the clicked event. And once the logic of the clicked event execution finishes, we're going to return the value to false. Finally, we're going to go to the event that is in charge of monitoring each one of the values of the slider, and we're going to indicate that before carrying out the execution of these assignments, we're going to compare the variable isRandom. Let's cut this code inside the if, and this way we're going to make sure that this code is only going to be executed when we have not fired the clicked event. Let's start once again the execution of the application. I click on this button, let's go to the output, and you can see that we are already executing the method only once, with which we have solved this problem that we had previously. The last step that we have pending as part of the application is to be able to copy the generated hexadecimal color. We're going to do this very easily using a NuGet package. For this, we're going to go to the project, we're going to indicate that we want to manage the NuGet packages, and we're going to proceed to search for a package through the term MAUI community. We have this NuGet package called community-toolkit.net MAUI, and we're going to install it. In case you don't see the package listed, make sure you have included those with a preview version by selecting this checkbox. Once we have installed the package, a file opens with instructions on how to use this NuGet package. We are instructed to go to the method called createMauiApp, so I'm going to copy this line below the initial comment, and I'm going to go to the file called mauiprogram.cs. Below this line that says bar_builder equal to mauiapp.createBuilder, I am going to paste the line of code that we copied. We must import the namespace that is needed, which is community-toolkit.maui, and with this we will be able to use the NuGet package. We're going to go to the mainpage.xaml file. We're going to locate the control type image button, which is the one that should allow us to copy the hexadecimal value, and we're going to create the event handler for this event. We return to the mainpage.xaml.cs file. We already have here created the new event handler. We're going to convert this method into an asynchronous method, and inside the definition we're going to indicate a wait clipboard, and we have a method called setTextAsync that is going to allow us to place in the clipboard a text, and the text is going to be a field to which we are going to call xValue that we have not defined yet. Let's proceed to define this field. We're going to go to the top section of the file, and we're going to indicate that we want to define this field of type string. Let's indicate that as part of the method called setColor, we want to set this value, which is equal to color.2x. That is to say, we're going to cut this section below, and we're going to indicate that the label is going to be equal to xValue, since it is going to contain the value that we already obtained previously. With this, we will ensure that we always have the latest version of the selected value. Once we have done this, we already have a valid method. we're going to indicate that we want to copy in the clipboard this hexadecimal value. And finally, we're going to indicate that we want to create a toast through. We have to import the namespace that is needed, which is community-toolkit.maui.alerts, and we have a method called make to create precisely this message. We're going to indicate as message color copied. As second parameter, we must specify the duration. We're going to indicate that we want a short duration. And finally, the font size that is going to be equal to 12 in our case. Finally, we're going to indicate that we want to show it through the method called show. With these lines that we have added, we're going to proceed to test the application. We already have here the application being executed. Let's press the button. Let's check if we can copy the hexadecimal value by pressing the button. We can see the toast that tells us that the color was copied. Let's check if it works correctly. We can see that we are already copying successfully the hexadecimal value of the color that we have generated thanks to the application. In this way, we have created our first application in .NET MAUI from scratch, and it is a functional application, and that also has a very good appearance.